This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. This episode is sponsored by C-School, the online school for creativity training. If you'd like to unleash your creative potential and access a free Creativity Blueprint training series, then just head over to c.school. That's www.c.school for your free training series. In this episode, I speak with Dane Sanders, and we talk about the business of creativity, how to start a mastermind, and finding your authentic sound. Enjoy this episode. Hey there, it's James Taylor, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Dane Sanders. Dane helps freelancers and entrepreneurs become owners. With earned degrees in business and philosophy, Dane photographed professionally for over 12 years. He now speaks, consults, and coaches on the business of creativity at Fastermind.co, as well as being the author of 2 best-selling business books for creatives. Seth Godin describes his fast-track photographer book as a priceless gift, offering advice on how to make a living in a world where everyone has a camera. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Dane on the show today. So welcome, Dane.
Thank you, James. I really appreciate it.
So share with our listeners what's going on in your world just now.
Well, it's Southern California, blue sky, which is not fair because there's lots of other parts of the world where it's not like that. And so coming off, it's a fall weekend with my family, a lot to be grateful for, looking ahead to the holidays, but then we get to launch our year with our annual gathering with our community, with everyone coming together and at the Go Summit. And for us, that's a massive highlight for us to launch our year well. And again, to do it in sunny Southern California doesn't hurt either. So that's kind of a little of our world right now. So
I mentioned you had this career as a photographer, and then you kind of transitioned into what people know you today as, really as a coach for other creatives and other entrepreneurs as well. Can you talk to us about that transition? About what was the reasoning behind making that transition in your life, and what did you hope to get, and what do you hope to kind of serve? How do you hope to serve your audience with that new way of kind of being out there in the world?
Yeah, well, it actually was more of a return. So when I first began as an adult, I guess, I had a graduate degree in philosophy, and I was teaching at a liberal arts college in Santa Barbara, California, and had an extraordinary experience. I loved educating. I loved teaching. I loved seeing the epiphany moments and also people taking action out of those epiphanies. And I had the chance to teach specifically around leadership and character development. And again, these students were just so inspirational to me and really galvanizing in my own life. And it was somewhere in that era that I picked up a camera, and as a student who was about to drop out of college, who got me into it. And like a bad drug, it ruined my academic career. And I found myself in this creative space, but really kind of the crossroads of creativity and commerce and business, and trying to figure out if I'm going to make these photographs, how am I going to make money from these photographs? And that space in particular, I found very interesting, and discovered a whole new community of people that I just fell for. And they were certainly photographers, but they were far more than that. A lot of other folks ended up into the conversation, and really taking kind of a cue from my roots. I was basically smuggling in my leadership and character development ideas into the conversation with my colleagues in and around the craft and art of photography. And I ended up sitting down and self-publishing a book. My first book, called Fast Track Photographer, was specifically for wedding photographers. And then about 6 months later, I got a call from Random House, and they wanted to acquire, it's now Penguin Random House, but they wanted to acquire the first book and expand it so it was available for all photographers. And then did a second book deal with them called the Fast Track Photographer Business Plan. And it was funny, you mentioned Seth in the intro. Seth is so dear to me. He called Fast Track, photography book that's not about photography, because it isn't. It's really about identity. If you're going to be yourname.com, you might want to think through how you position for that. And I had a chance to kind of share pretty pretty in depth around my own process of thinking that the goal at the beginning was, how do I convince people to buy my services, and really sell my soul in the process, where I was trying to kind of misrepresent myself. And then very quickly I discovered that a far more effective way of marketing is to be authentic and to actually tell the truth. And it was indicting on the front end, but on the back end, incredibly rewarding to work out this process of trying to sell my services, but not to everybody, just to the folks that it was the right fit, and to get clearer and clearer about who I was. It's funny. I think small business ownership is like a master course in self-discovery, and because you come to your end, you realize you feel like a fraud. Everyone, scarcity abounds. Like, all of these kinds of hard moments happen for all of us, all of your listeners, and yet there's such an opportunity when we get real about that and we surround ourselves with the right kind of voices. We can interrupt those negative conversations and have extraordinary, turnarounds. And that was my story, and I was so grateful for it. So fast forward, I shot professionally for about 12 years, and I have 4 kids, 3 high schoolers, 3 high schools. This is not a season I want to be gone on the weekend. And a few years back now, probably about 5 or so ago, I started seriously thinking about 2 things. 1, how could we expand the conversation beyond photographers? And 2, how could we do it in a way where I didn't have to keep traveling around the planet to take photographs at weddings? And that where we landed was with Fastermind. So Fastermind.co is really a community of people who understand that business is really freaking hard, but it doesn't have to be that complicated. And if we can get out of our own way and we can support each other in that process, we want to. So we offer things like this marching order, figure out your year, launch out of the gate thing in January called the Go Summit. We have ongoing individual and group coaching, where I don't coach all of those groups. We have a team of really incredibly trained and well executing coaches who really just help people, again, get out of their own way. And we're also getting ready to launch several initiatives in January that we'll be announcing at the summit, but they connect specifically to how do we maintain throughout the year, not just have these kind of event-oriented efforts to grow, but how do we develop habits of growth in and around us, and how can the folks in this community help to make that happen? So that's a long-winded answer, but some of my background.
And as far as you're just talking about it, kind of that the linkage there, or the intersection of business and creativity. As you're talking, I mean, I'm wondering why so many creative professionals, I include photographers with this as well, but not just people that are doing kind of creative work, why they often park their creativity when it comes to the business side of what they do. So they're incredibly creative in their art and the thing that they're creating, and then they feel that when they get into the dealing with the business and selling their work, they suddenly have to get really boring in corporate. And I'm just wondering, you said you talked about this word authenticity with that. Can you tell us, describe in a bit more detail about where you kind of got to with this? Because I think this is something a lot of creatives struggle with is how to do it in a how to sell in a non-salesy way, is part of it. But how to have that, they've given their heart and their soul to their thing that they've created, and how can that kind of also move across in terms of how they work with people, how they do business with people?
There's this great scene in the movie Say Anything. It's like 1 million years old, but if you were a Gen Xer, it was like one of those movies where this great character is trying to live authentically, and he's, are you familiar with this movie?
No, I don't know.
John Cusack.
No.
Okay. So Say Anything, John Cusack. It's worth a Netflix night. But there's this great scene where this character is just committed to being authentic. He's talking to the daughter, the father of the woman he wants to, the young lady that he wants to date, and the dad is asking this guy his intentions, and he basically goes on this incredible monologue about what he wants to do with his future. And he says, well, I don't want to buy anything sold or sell anything bought, or processed or sold or bought. And it's this incredible kind of anthem, manifesto of how he does not want to sell out to the man. And I think that kind of picture really captures this kind of vibe in the creative space. If people self-identify primarily as an artist and not as a business person, then their default is going to be it's going to be I became an artist so that I did not need to be one of those things over there. But the problem is they want to feed their kids and they want a roof over their heads, and there's this really weird out of body experience where they feel like they need to park their true selves in one camp where they did their creative, and now they have to go and take on some caricature of a salesperson where they're selling used cars or something. And it's funny, like used car salesmen, they get a bad rap. Some of them are amazing. Some of them provide incredible services for people in a non-slimy way, and they do it because they pay a lot of attention on the front end to listening to who they're talking to, and not just trying to lead with who they are. They consider the client as the hero of the story, not the creative. And they actually just think through, am I a good fit for this person? And then they try to remove limiting conversations, like maybe I'm a better fit than I might appear in the first hand. So to answer your question, I think it begins with, how do you self-identify? Do you see yourself primarily as a creative or as an entrepreneur or freelancer kind of thing? And regardless, even if you see yourself as more on the business side, that is advantageous on the front end, as long as you don't go too far with it and try to think that it's all about you and how do you get more money in the door. I think that we live in an artisanal age now where, and funny, this guy named Dan Pink wrote a great book called A Whole New Mind, probably about 10 years ago now. And Dan's incredible. He's written several books, but he was one of the first in this space to really invite people to consider the age we're in and how much of an asset these emotionally intelligent, soft skill kind of things are. Things like empathy, things like compassion. When we apply those kinds of skills with our customers, and we really spend more energy not just trying to get them to buy the thing, but more making sure there's a fit, or making the case of why we think there's a fit, or helping them feel safe on the front end of the transaction, all of a sudden selling isn't hard at all. In fact, I would argue that most of my creative friends, they sell me all the time. When it's something that they're unconsciously selling me about, like the movie they saw, the book they've read, the album they heard, they're endorsing because they have a passion for the thing. And I think we just need to see our customers as people who are like us, and they're looking for those kinds of recommendations. But all we need to do is be attentive and position our offering in such a way where the right people, our people, kind of discover us. And I think if we have this urgency of we need to sell to everybody indiscriminately, I think that's where people feel this sense of scarcity, and I just need to be in a race to the bottom, as Seth Godin says, to lower my value or my pricing. And that's not necessary. I think once you get clear on who you're selling to, and you spend a lot of energy kind of sorting your customers, not selling your customers, and finding your fit, you can speak directly to them in a very clear and plain way, and just kind of make the offering known. And they will respond, and it's so relieving. But it requires the reason I'm such a fan of coaching, like coaches in my own life, is I can get so stuck in a scarcity mindset or just a limiting conversation with myself around, oh, no one likes what I have, or no one's going to appreciate it the way they should, or whatever. And that's true. Sometimes people don't. You don't always get paid for your art, but the people who do pay, everyone has known from the beginning of commissioned art time. There's some people who disproportionately pay a lot of money for your stuff, and they cover for the folks that pay less. Yeah. And that's okay. That's the way the model's set up.
You mentioned offerings there, and you have this event which is happening in January, the Go Summit. I'm wondering, you could have easily put on like these big, large events, multiple speakers and things, but I sense that you kind of decided to go much more kind of smaller, more focused, more kind of personal with your events. Am I right in saying that? And if so, what was the kind of the thinking, and is that something that you feel works for your kind of model and works for your kind of audience that you're trying to help?
Yeah, I think intimate is a word that's like the intimate space, a safe space, a space where you can be real about your situation. I think that's in short supply these days. And I think what's not in short supply is the contrast. So like public spaces where you can connect with a lot of people, but it's a very curated connection. Like people get to know a very narrow band of kind of who you are when they are exposed to your social tweets or Instagrams or whatever kind of is the channel of the day, or even kind of broad-based networking events. I'm not against those things. I just think when we set too much expectation of what we're going to get from them, we'll get pretty disappointed. And I think honestly, most people have just kind of lowered their expectations on conferences. They go, okay, I'm going to go and get a swag bag. I'm going to see it like 2 or 3 of my buddies, wander through the experience and come out the other side and not do anything new. But, at least we went to the party. And I think that, like, at least for me as a freelancer and an entrepreneur, I don't have enough margin for that anymore. I don't think it's acceptable to go to conferences and have a whole bunch of really, really good ideas that I don't actually execute on. And we decided early on that with Go, because there's so many, even the best conferences, like I would love to go to the Real TED, or I would love to go to 99U, or like there's some amazingly well-crafted large events. I don't want to poo-poo those, but I think there's a big chunk in the middle that they're cliche. They don't deliver anything of substantive worth apart from an excuse to get together. And we wanted more, and I wanted more selfishly. So I basically just gathered my friends and said, who are our people, and how can we do this? We've done this now for several years and started very modestly, and we have about 100, 150 people who come. We go to a hotel across the beach or from the beach in Surf City, USA, in Huntington Beach, and we do 2.5 days. There are several speakers, but even the way we do it, like we have a speaker present, and then after the speaker presents, somewhere around the kind of the convergence of creativity and business, or the things people talk on, we immediately break into small groups of 8 to 10 people with a trained coach whose job is to purely lead that group of people around the talk that was just given. And they're taught how to take notes on what was given, what was said, what did they make up about what was said, and so what. And the goal is to get to a place where they articulate specifically what is the action thing that they could do as a result of what they heard in that one talk. And then they go to the next talk. And then at the end of the time, people have this book, these marching orders, where our final session is to actually go through all of the sessions where you pull out your single one thing that you're supposed to do from each one, and we begin to prioritize them. And we actually come up with a single task. That's it. One thing to do as a result of going to this event. And this community now are with you in committing to getting that single thing done. And we call that a win. If you go to a conference and actually find the one thing that will make the biggest difference for your business, you've curated that, you've clarified that, you've prioritized, and now you're like, I'm going to execute, and you have a team of people around you to support you while you do it, your likelihood of accomplishing that big game-changing thing goes through the roof. And that's what we want. And that's what we've seen happen, and that's what we're continuing to build. So for folks that are at home and they're listening, they're like, I could really start my year well with that. That's a better kind of investment than going to the gym or buying a gym membership and going for a week. This is kind of like training for a year and launching your year and mapping your year in such a way that you're actually going to come back a year from then and feel like, oh wow, look at the actual measurable difference that happened because of it.
On that kind of analogy of the kind of the going to the gym, you buy your gym membership, you maybe go first couple of times and you feel you kind of leave there and you go, okay, this is what I want to do, and you're kind of pumped up, you're excited about it, but someone like Stephen Pressfield would say, resistance starts kicking in.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
How do you help people kind of transition to ensure that the rest of the year they can actually continue? I mean, this is someone like Seth Godin is obviously great at like shipping. He's always talking about shipping,
yes.
Getting stuff out. How can you help people out throughout the course of the year? And even if someone doesn't maybe have a coach, is there any kind of ideas that you have in terms of how to ensure that you're continually executing and you're remaining kind of focused on moving that thing ahead?
No question. I mean, this is what mastermind groups were from the beginning. And even though we're called Fastermind, all we're doing is creating a vehicle for folks to do. If they don't want to be the facilitator and the participant, then they probably need someone like us to help them. They don't have to be us, but they need someone like us, and you need some kind of input. But for some folks, they can self-organize. Like, it's pretty easy. Step one, make a list of everybody in your world that you respect, who you have direct access to, that you could call and they'd pick up the phone, that you could say something vulnerable and that you wouldn't feel shame about it. Like, whatever that list is, make that list. And then number two, rank them, A, B, and C. Like, who is your A list? Who would be the people that if you could get their input around you, like your project throughout the year, who would they be? And then kind of now you have your A list, your B list, your C list, and then ask the question: are they different from you? Are they going to give alternative perspectives, or are they just going to be applauding? Kind of like, anything I put out, my mother likes everything I put out, but that doesn't mean it's helpful. Her feedback is helpful in me improving. I need fierce conversations where I'm getting actual feedback. So once you go through and you kind of map out your values around those things, start at the top and call them up and say, I am starting a group. Call them, don't email them, call them and say, I am starting a group. And I thought of all the people on the planet that could be in it. And I thought you were the one that I would want most. You're in my list. And would you consider it? And I'm doing it whether you do it or not. But we're going to start on this day at this time, and this time will end. The format's going to be, we're going to have the hot seat model. That's the easiest one to go with, which is we're going to take turns. You're going to prepare and present whatever you're in the middle of and what the big project is. And we're going to give, for the first half, and the second half, we're going to give you feedback on it. And it's going to be harsh feedback. And you're going to commit to something at the end of what you're going to do between now and the next time you present. And then you're done. And then the next time we come together, someone else is going to be in the hot seat, and you're going to be as invested as they were in you. And we're going to do this over the course of a year and see if it makes a difference. And if it does, we'll reassess and quit. But if not, it's a year commitment. Would you like to do it? Anybody right now can go do that. Simple as nothing. But the challenge is people don't. They're lonely. They're scared. They're sitting in their room. They're listening to they're running, listening to this podcast. They're like, I want that, but I need somebody's help. And that's where we say, understand it. We want to help you too.
And what about the blend? Sometimes for those, you think, well, I've got these 3 friends, people I know but they're miles ahead of me in terms of where I'm trying to get. Is there kind of an optimal blend, maybe to have people that are, should we be having, maybe everyone around you should be like much further, or should be having maybe a mixture of people that may be a bit further down the road, other people that may be at the same level as you, maybe people that are just maybe behind you in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I like to think of kind of two different, that's a great question. I like to think of it two ways. One, when it comes to a mastermind group or a Fastermind group, I strongly encourage people who are colleagues, people who are kind of at your band. If someone else was looking at you and said, what's your band? They'd name people. If you start naming like Barack Obama is in your band and you don't have direct access, that's silly. Like it's just not resourceful. Or if you're coming up with just kind of name brand people that are in your space and they'd answer the phone, but it's not going to benefit them to be a part of the group. It doesn't, you get that. There's something about a band of sisters and brothers that are where you're at. That's especially valuable. And it's easy to kind of think of folks that you wish were a part of your group, but that's more of a mentor relationship, and that's distinct from what I'm talking about.
Okay.
It is good for you to talk to someone like that in a one-to-one relationship and get input from them. And if you're going to do that, before you ask for that from somebody else, go to somebody who you see as very humble and very learnable, like kind of is coachable and learnable, and then offer that same thing to them. So if you're going to be in a one-up relationship with somebody else, it's reasonable to ask for someone ahead of you to help you out as well. They're disconnected, but at least in your mind, you're like, look, I'm giving and I'm receiving. I'm leading with giving and I'm receiving, and those kinds of relationships. But the first group I was talking about, that in my experience, unless it's for a specific project, it's good to have people within range of where you're at, and that the feedback, they kind of get the season you're in. If you're running a $20 million company and you're inviting somebody who's running a $200 million company, it's going to be different kinds of conversations. And if it's a $20,000 company, again, a very different kind of conversation. So that's how I give advice on that.
Great advice on it. And this journey that you've had yourself, as photographer, from the education and the photography, and then the coaching now that you do, and the speaking, was there a really powerful kind of aha moment, a time when you went, oh, okay, this is the direction I want to go with my work, or you just made a distinction that you felt was very, very powerful and changed the direction of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I've had several of those kinds of moments, but there have been some really key voices in my life that have both marked me and then continue to mark me. You mentioned Seth Godin. He's someone I've had the privilege of knowing for about 10 years now. And that's been a really resourceful relationship for me, because for many years I was terrified he wouldn't remember my name when I re-met him, or we weren't like intimate friends or anything like that. It was he was someone I held up on a pedestal. And I remember a couple of years ago, I was at a dinner he invited me to in Boston. After he was speaking at this massive conference, and it was like him and Aziz and Sarah and Chelsea Clinton and Brene Brown and Seth Godin. They were the main stagers, and we all went to like 10 or 12 of us went to dinner. And I remember when we had a chance just for a few minutes to connect, and I told him that I had made this kind of decision in my gut that I wasn't going to keep him on a pedestal anymore. I was kicking the pedestal over because it was getting in the way of our relationship. And I remember he looked at me and with this kind of look of relief, and he just said, "Well, it's about time." And then he said, "Dane, we are colleagues. We're the same. We're trying to do something." And he went on to affirm the contributions I've made, and it was incredible. I mean, it was so. It was like getting a blessing from somebody. But at the same time, he also made it more neutral, more on the ground, because clearly he has meant a lot to me and the things that he's accomplished. But then he just humanized it and said, "Look, it's hard, and we're just trying to make a difference. That's what we're doing here." And for whatever reason, when that happened and I began to see myself differently, that unlocked a lot for me. I began to just kind of relax, get comfortable in my own skin. And I think that's some of it for a lot of folks early on, especially as they haven't quite gotten that comfort in their own skin yet. And that's it's a hard place to be. It's kind of like going through adolescence. And I forgive the metaphor because I have several adolescents in my house. That's why I'm thinking of them. But they don't totally know who they are yet. And they're figuring it out and they're trying stuff on. And I love that stage. It's an amazing stage. I look back with it with nostalgia. Like I wish I could, in a sense, go back to playing around with those, experimenting. But I also like this stage a lot because at this stage, I get to live into the things that I was uniquely made to do. And I think that was the big epiphany was I think all of us at heart are trying to figure out what we were made to go do. The problem is it isn't quite that objective. It's more created. It's more discovered and exploited and explained or like experimented with. So like there's this leadership guy named Bobby Clinton who teaches at the school in Pasadena, and he's an older guy, and he says that in our 20s we think we can do everything. In our 30s we don't think we can do anything. And in our 40s we discover we can do a few things. And in our 50s we discover we're only really good at one thing. And in our 60s we actually do it. And I think that a very predictable path of leading yourself well is something that the sooner you embrace it, the sooner the decades kind of shorten up a little bit. And you become less satisfied with the things that you weren't supposed to go do. And you're not emulating your heroes who were doing a totally different job than you're called to do. Seth is very different than me. He's doing a different set of projects, even though we have similar values. And when we come from that place, we can celebrate it and truly be colleagues. And I think that if we could have more true colleagues in and around the creative fields, I think the world would be a better place. And I think we would have a better experience of that creative aspect, especially as we try to do it in the marketplace.
And it almost reminds me, just as you're talking there about the way that great musicians kind of develop. For example, most musicians when they start playing, they're imitating other musicians. That's how they learn.
It's the standard. There's standards.
They're learning the standards.
Yes, of course.
They're imitating Seth, or they're imitating. They're kind of doing their thing. Yes. And then by the sheer fact, as humans, we're actually terrible at copying things most of the time. Invariably, and if you copy and you try enough things, then you kind of start to find what your sound is. So you okay? I can hear. I was just thinking the other day. I heard a singer the other day, and I thought actually I can hear a little bit of Lena Horne there, but I can also hear a little bit of Ella Fitzgerald going on as well. There's something, and then there's this other thing. I don't even know what that is. That's their thing that they're pulling out as well. But it takes time. You have to kind of learn those standards. You have to kind of pay your dues, I guess, to kind of develop that, and then start coming into your own authenticity and developing your own sound, as you were kind of alluding to as well. I'm interested as we start to kind of finish up here as well. You obviously have your book as well, but if you could recommend just one book and actually one record, as we're talking about music, one book and one record to our listeners, you think that would maybe interesting to turn them on to, what would that book and that record be?
Oh, those are good questions. Well, as you were talking, I immediately thought of Austin Kleon's Steal Like an Artist. I think I've had the privilege of meeting Austin a few times, and he describes the process. That and Show Your Work are two companion little books that I think would really serve. And I'm guessing a lot of your audience have discovered those already, but if they haven't, even go back and reread them. I've read them, and then after I met him, I read it again, and I found it far more profound even then, because he had presented on it, and then I read it again, and I was just so moved. What a gift it is to be less freaked out about the wrong things and properly concerned about the right things. And he kind of helps you get straight which is which. And music, man, this one kind of blew like Miles Davis. Like how do you not go there? But I think that the best creatives do exactly what you described. Like, I think this notion of starting with who are the folks that you're drawn to, and then standing on their shoulders and giving appropriate credit. And it honors, it's so funny, it honors the folks that whose shoulders you're standing on. And it's also, big picture. It's like, it's very humble. Like we're all just a whiff. We're going to be gone in a minute, and we'll be forgotten by far more people that'll remember us. So I think if we just took it with a little less weightiness too, we might enjoy the ride a little bit more as well. And I think for some of your folks who are maybe being just a little hard on themselves, maybe if they could just be gentler, just be kinder a little bit, not just to others, but to yourself. I think you might discover that more will come quicker. The biggest mistake I made by miles was believing that there were shortcuts. And the long cut is the shortcut. It can sound cliche, but the whole, the process is the journey. Like, that's the point. And if we're not enjoying this part of it, whether we're in adolescence or we're someplace else in the process, you're not going to enjoy the end either, because the joyful means is required to enjoy the end. Yeah. And I think that there's opportunity there for all of us to reconsider, like, how am I being kind to myself in the process? Am I creating a little bit more space? And to even treat a little bit of our work as more play than work. And then when we get to the selling of these things, all we're doing is looking for our friends who were just like us when we were drawn to this kind of stuff. And when we find them, it doesn't take a lot of them to make a living, and it's good news. It's a great moment to be in. And
as you're describing that, I'm almost thinking, of the great stories, like those classic kind of the hero's journey. The stories are always so much more interesting if they have those highs and lows. The most boring stories are the got up, all went incredibly well, left. They're boring stories. Yeah. So actually, and I think often we forget this as creatives and as artists, I would say as well, that how for other people, how that is actually interesting, knowing that journey that you've gone through to create the actual, so almost like the story of the creation of the thing is sometimes may seem very mundane to you because you're in it all the time, but it's actually for people outside that are interested in your work and the kind of work you do, is absolutely fascinating to see that. So it's been an absolute kind of pleasure speaking with you today, Dane. Where's the best place for people to go to learn more about the Fastermind and also your Go Summit and your other kind of products and programs that you have available just now?
Yeah, I'd say danesanders.com is probably the easiest kind of clearing space to see it all. If folks want to go straight to our community, fastermind.co is also great. But just Dane, I'm easily found. Dane Sanders, it's pretty fun. So we'll I hope your folks do reach out, because it's been a privilege to be on here, man. I love what you're doing. I love the as Seth says, the ruckus you're making. It's the right kind of ruckus, and we need more of it. So thank you for all you're doing. Yeah, and if you've taken nothing else from this entire conversation we've been having today, go and form a band. Go and form an intellectual band of your fellow creatives. Well, Dane, thank you so much for coming on, and I hope to maybe hang out next time I'm in California with you. I would love that. Thanks, James. Hey, James Taylor here again.
And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.